What's up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast. It's the pre-training camp pod. Are you excited? I am too. 2021 promises to be a fascinating season. What are we going to hit in this pod? Well, we're going to talk a little Stephon Gilmore. We're going to talk a little N'Keal Harry. We're going to talk the quarterback battle, of course, on the eve of camp. Big camp questions. Phil A. Perry will be in to discuss that with us. But we're going to start with 2021 being Bill Belichick's opportunity for rebuttal to Tom Brady's 2020 Super Bowl win. And with that, I'm going to bring in our good friend Phil Perry, who will, along with me and the rest of everybody else at NBC Sports Boston, lead the way, be at the vanguard, be the point of the spear on coverage of the 2021 Patriots training camp and regular season. Phil?
That's right. You know it. And I find your take to be an interesting one because Bill Belichick, to me, is where he wants to be right now, Tom. I think he's got things set up the way he wants. And so he should be theoretically in good position for, as you put it, a rebuttal. Should he not?
He should be. But the interesting thing with Bill is, this is what he wanted. This is what he chose. And in so doing, to get to this spot, he kind of had to walk over some hot coals that he didn't even expect were going to be there. I'd hate to say that 2015 through 2019 was a slog because the Patriots went to an AFC championship game every year except for 19, and they went to 3 Super Bowls and they won a couple of them. Should have won the other. But the expectations were such, and the looming dysfunction is the looming drama that entailed the Brady dismount. Had that pall that was attached to it the whole way through. What Belichick wanted was to extract himself from an aging quarterback who was high maintenance. I'm not going to call him a diva, but he was high maintenance. So Belichick convinced Robert Kraft that we're not going to give him the deal. Well, they didn't give him the deal, and Robert Kraft said, okay, it's up to you, Bill. And it would have all been fine if Tom Brady went to Tampa Bay and went 10-6 or 9-7 or 8-8, and the Patriots went 7-9. Then we would have both concluded, everybody around, that, well, they needed each other, clearly. It's not what happened. We know that. So now Brady doesn't necessarily have Belichick in checkmate, but he has him in check. But Belichick has done a great job, Phil, answering this offseason, hasn't he? Because of a confluence of circumstances.
Yeah, and that's what I would say. When I say he is where he wants to be, I think the roster is close to where he would want it right now when you just look at it on paper. And they have a lot to prove before they prove that they're actually a halfway decent team. He's probably not where he wants to be in terms of how well the other guy did without him and the Patriots and that structure around him. So you're right. It's certainly not an ideal scenario in which Bill Belichick finds himself, but the ability to spend as much money as they could spend with all the cap dollars that they had, the inability for other teams to spend the way they might have wanted to spend because of the pandemic allows them to go crazy. And they get an edge defender when they needed an edge defender. They got 2 tight ends when they had probably none. They got a couple of receivers who might be okay. The team should be drastically improved. It still comes down to one position in my mind, but Belichick has done a pretty good job of addressing just about every other hole on this roster. And he might have addressed the quarterback position hole. Right. We just don't know that yet.
Yeah. And I mean, they get guys back from COVID. They get guys back who were released by other teams like Kyle Van Noy. You still have Stephon Gilmore. You had a good draft, in my estimation, in 2020. Players like Kyle Duggar are going to be good. So you're trending in the right direction, but you have the quarterback position. And to me, when you look at that situation, it's because there wasn't a succession plan in place. And if that ends up being the anchor on this team, it's not just because of Tom Brady's decision in March of 2020. It's not just because the Patriots had to scramble to replace him. It's a litany of decisions since 2017 when Jimmy Garoppolo was traded. And then the tight ends weren't restaffed. And then the wide receivers weren't restaffed. So if you're Robert Kraft, you're looking at, okay, we didn't have any tight ends or wide receivers. Tom Brady went someplace else and won a Super Bowl. I thought he wasn't supposed to be good anymore. Why is he doing that? Meanwhile, I look at San Francisco as the owner of this team and say, man, that's the guy you wanted to replace Brady? He can't even stay on the field out there, Bill. So to me, this is a little bit of put up or shut up. Bill Belichick will be the greatest coach in NFL history in 2050, 2075, and probably 2099, when you are about 111 years old and still covering the team. But
damn right.
right now, this will color what happens with Patriots Dynasty 3.0, this little newborn with all covered with, the wonderful afterbirth of 2020 and coming back out. Clean them up, towel them off, cut the cord, and put him out into the world. How he fares will reflect on how Bill Belichick orchestrated the Brady dismount, because that player still could play. He could still play.
Is it too much riding on Mac Jones's shoulders? And does he have to show something this year, Tom, to make everybody involved, maybe even ownership included, feel better about the situation moving forward?
100%. Absolutely. He has to show more than glimmers. And I think he's done that already. He's shown concrete ability to play the position at the NFL level. We're already talking about, in reasonable tones, him being able to supplant Cam Newton by week 1. And it's not the national people who don't have eyes here. It's us who watch the practices. It's you who chart the throws. So that being the case, again, serendipitous as it may have been for Bill Belichick, things are working out okay for the guy. Poor him, right? He's had a tough life. Things haven't gone his way all the way through. Yes, they have, mostly. But when we look at Mac Jones, this is a life preserver that I'm not sure Bill even wanted to latch on to. You okay with this, Matt? Matt Groh? Bears? You okay? Can somebody get somebody call up Bobby Hamilton from the 01 team. See if Anthony Pleasant likes this pick too. We'll get everybody in on this. Just so everyone knows this wasn't me all by myself. Mac Jones could be Bill Belichick's life preserver, Phil. How do you like that?
Well, if he got that one right, and they are set up for the next 10 years, I mean, people aren't going to forget the fact that Tom Brady won a Super Bowl his first year away from New England, but damn, I mean, that's a pretty good hit rate. He hasn't had that many opportunities to have to fill that position. And if he did it essentially on the first try, that's pretty damn good.
And that's why the rebuttal opportunity is so in place. And I'm not of a mind like so many were post-draft to say, well, if the Patriots really wanted Mac Jones, they would have traded up for him. No, they let the game come to them. They picked him where he should have been picked, and they addressed a need. Did they get it right? Did good fortune get left swaddled on their doorstep the same way Belichick thought he was doing for Kyle Shanahan and the Niners when he left little Jimmy Garoppolo and knocked on the door and ran away? We'll see. But to me, for Bill Belichick, he has set himself up. But what I want to talk about really briefly before we get into Bill's time today is the learning curve. We have a team in front of us that has completely rebuilt its offense, that had a compressed and absence-laden offseason. More players weren't here than normal. Additionally, you have a training camp that's going to unfold that continues to be whittled down at times that players can be on the field together. Patriots have 2 joint practices, but only 3 games. How long is it going to be, Phil, before the Patriots know who they are? Before the offense knows what it is?
I think the Patriots know what they want the offense to be. And I think that stuff's always evolving, right? 2018, it evolved late in that season for them. It took them a long time to figure out who they were and what they did best. I think if you're Josh McDaniels, though, you have a really good idea of what you want and how you want it to look. And that's why I have been really open to the idea of Mac Jones starting week 1, even before we saw him in minicamp, because I look at it and say, they're used to running the offense one way. Mac Jones seems to fit that profile. He seems to fit the personnel that they've added. Cam does too in certain respects, but Mac Jones could work in a run heavy, play action heavy kind of offense that requires a quarterback to be making quick hitting throws in the short to intermediate area. Like that's kind of what he does. It's what he did.
So that being the case, don't they have to accelerate their decision-making between now and August 19th, when they have their second preseason game of 3 against the Philadelphia Eagles? I think they have to accelerate it. Look, it's either Cam seizes it and you can put the kid on ice for a little while and you can run the offense that you don't love and continue to bring him along, Or you could just say, okay, it's too close to call, and I know which way we're going to go with this offense eventually anyway. Get the young fella in there. That's why, to me, and I have loved your take. It's been steadfast. It has been true. I wouldn't say that it's been bulletproof, but you haven't wavered. You haven't wavered. It's going to be Mac Jones early. And I've been the other way. But if it's close, I've continually said it's going to be Cam Newton because Bill doesn't want to toggle back and forth. But maybe, Phil, if Cam can't hit the ground running the way he ought to, it's okay, you know what? I'm just pissing up a rope, splitting reps between these guys. Let's get the guy who's going to be the quarterback over the long term in there.
And to me, that would make more sense because
kick him off the dock.
Just shove him right in there. And I think you would embrace that. We don't know Mac Jones well enough from a personality perspective to understand how he'd handle it, but everything that we've heard about him, it sounds like he would embrace that. It sounds like he has that mentality that would allow him to not shrink from that kind of responsibility. And so if they're close to me, I would go with the guy that's going to maybe be better by the end of the season. That's when you want to be peaking anyway. You want to play your best football, November, December. I would say if you have two quarterbacks, if we're, my nerd brain, I'm almost afraid to admit how I'm picturing this, but I'll admit it anyway. I'm picturing an X and a Y axis. And I'm picturing both guys starting at the same point. If that's the case, if they're both starting around the same point, why would you not take the player that has the potentially steeper curve when it comes to his growth?
Because the contention is, to me, that whichever axis the two men start at, one is higher on the axis in terms of the experience access, seen it before, done it before. Because as much as we want to talk about SEC football and how polished and Alabama's the 33rd team, they're not.
No.
And so that's why I would have Cam a little higher on that other axis.
So no, that's what I'm saying is you'd have both guys starting. If both guys are starting at the same point, and I'm talking about performance, Cam's always going to have the experience factor, but he had the experience factor last year too. And, Blake Bortles got the experience factor on Mac Jones. You play Blake Bortles over Mac Jones. Like at some point that doesn't really matter.
Do you think Cam was outperformed by Mac Jones during minicamp?
I do. I think for 2 of the 3 days. So for the majority of the practices, minicamp, it's a very small sample size, but for 2 of the 3 days, he was the better quarterback. And if that's the rate at which it's going to go during training camp, I don't think it should take very long before they settle on Mac Jones and say, hey, we've got to make a choice. We've got to give our guy reps with the ones. We can't be running the ones into the ground. We don't want our number one offensive line, running 100 plays a day in practice. So we've got to pick our spots here, get the guy who's going to actually play week 1 the time and go with it. And I think Bill Belichick is a pretty decisive guy. And I don't think he's going to, unless Tom, there are these huge peaks and valleys from both players where the consistency is just not there for either one of them. Maybe the competition drags on, but if it's apparent to us, I think it'll be apparent to Bill Belichick. This is not rocket science. We're going to be able to see how well these guys are playing.
And that's the interesting thing, because there are going to be bad plays and there are going to be peaks and valleys. Explicable valleys, though, are what you're hoping for. Like Jarrett Stidham has inexplicable valleys. He does things. What did he do that? Why did he do that? Things were going so well. And then he does things that you just, that killed that. And now he's digging out. If the valley is explicable, well, he didn't know that guy was going to be there. And he comes back and it was a brief valley. Okay, boom. He's not making the same, like Jimmy Garoppolo would look horrendous sometimes inside the 10-yard line during the early practices of camp. And like, he can't play. He cannot play. It's too fast for him. And then 2 or 3 days later, he'd go on a friggin' tear. That's what Mac Jones has to be. And that's what Cam Newton has to get to. Because I haven't seen a lot of days, Phil, where I said, whew, he is on today. This is a clinic. Have you?
I haven't, Tom, but I wasn't at that third practice of minicamp.
He was transcendent.
Right, where he lit it up.
Transcendent.
He was the best quarterback on the field. And so, maybe had I seen that, my opinion would be a little bit different. I think you're going to get days like that occasionally with Cam. You're going to get week 2 in Seattle, right? Where he's
Mm.
throwing it all over the lot and he's looking accurate 40 yards down the field. But who is he really? And is he that guy more often than not? Or is he the guy who on 2nd and 7 is going to put it 5 yards beyond the reach of Nelson Aguilar, and all of a sudden you're in 3rd and long, and you're just not a team that's built to do that. And those are drive killers. I mean, it's almost as bad as taking a sack. It honestly is. You're not giving your teammate an opportunity to make a play, and you're putting yourself in a disadvantageous situation, especially with an offensive group that's really not built to be put in bad situations. They're not going to be an incredibly explosive offense this year. So you can't have those plays. I would call them negative plays, even though an incomplete pass isn't, you know what I'm saying? It's not necessarily negative, but they might as well be. And so I don't think you can live like that. And I don't think Josh McDaniels is going to want to live like that.
But you did get the ball to Jake Bailey. And that in many ways is what you're looking for.
Never bad.
But what does Bill Belichick think? I mean, he already coronated Cam Newton as his starter and made it very clear that he will not brook any conversation about Mac Jones usurping the throne of the 8-touchdown, 12-pick Cam. So here's what he had to say on his pre-training camp press conference video call on Tuesday when he was asked directly by Ian Steele of Providence's Channel 6 what he thought of an open competition at the quarterback position.
Yeah, as I said, every one of us has to go out and establish our level of performance in whatever our role or capacity is. So it's a new season. We've done some things in the spring, but this is really the start of football season in terms of the team building part here in training camp. So we all have a lot of work to do. That includes all of us. So until we go out and do anything, then it's pretty much a clean slate.
So a clean slate, including the quarterback situation as well?
Including the coaches and all the players.
All right, Phil, there you heard it. Now, a lot of eyes widened because Bill Belichick had walked the plank so clearly earlier this season in talking about Cam Newton as being the anointed starter. Can't blow him out of there. Couldn't blow him out of there last year. No blowing Cam Newton out of that spot. And now today he's talking about establishing a level.
I would say this. You tell me if you agree or not. I think on draft night, he understands there's so much buzz. There's so much excitement after you take a quarterback in the first round. He was just trying to get out ahead of a few questions that he knew he was going to be asked, wanted to be able to shoot them down before they even came his way. And he said something that might not be factually correct by the time September rolls around. And he was okay with it in that moment, because in that moment, it just would have been, it was such a fraught situation. He didn't necessarily want to light the powder keg. So that is my take on this. I think the Bill we heard today is more of the real Bill. And Bill looks at it and says, hey, we signed this guy to a 1-year deal worth $3 million. We drafted this other kid at 15 overall in the first round. I don't know how it's going to play out, but if we have to go to the other guy, it's not like we necessarily staked our lives to guy number 1 here in Cam Newton.
It's amazing how rabbit-eared Bill is. He's so rabbit-eared that he hears things before they're even said. I mean, think about that. He's declaring starters based upon the anticipation of a question that hadn't come yet. I get it. And he did that this morning as well with N'Keal Harry and Stephon Gilmore. We'll get to that in a second. But it is interesting what he said today when he said it. I was like, well, that's what he says about everybody. He says it about Tom Brady. He says it about Dante Hightower. He says it about Patrick Chung and Devin McCourty. Establish a level. But with those players, the established level left over from previously has indicated that they're probably going to be pretty good this year. If and when they're not and don't play to the level that you anticipate, well, then you start looking for reasons why. With Cam Newton, he didn't establish a level. He established a level on Wednesday of minicamp. That was an outlier level. And if he doesn't approach that level again during this extended minicamp over the first 4 days of camp, Bill Belichick might start drumming his fingers on the table. However, I think Cam can establish a level that is significantly better than last year, and this is going to take longer than you think, Phil Perry.
I think it's possible. I think it's possible. He'll be better. I just don't know if it's good enough.
He'll be better. He may not be good.
Can
All
I just
right.
add, can I add one more thing
Well,
that
of
I just think
course.
is interesting right before we get into the first training camp practice of the year? There was one little tiny little bitty nugget from Bill today suggesting that maybe they won't be in pads until a little bit later than normal. And I don't know exactly what the schedule is going to be. Usually it was day 3 and 4.
Mhm.
We would see them in pads. They do goal line. They do all sorts of run game stuff. If they're not in pads really early and we see, say, 4 or 5 practices without pads to start, my spin on this, Tom, is that this actually will be a good thing for us. This will be a good thing for the quarterback competition in New England, because when the pads come on, you know this, the quarterbacks might have 4 or 5 competitive throws all practice because it's so focused on the run game.
Mhm.
It's so focused on these situations and the half line run game and the 11-on-11 run game, the goal line. If it's shorts and t-shirts for 5 days, it's going to be passing camp, baby. Day
Wow.
after day after day after day. And these guys might get 30 reps. I mean, I don't know if they're going to lay that much on them, because you got to try to keep the arms fresh for the remainder of the summer. But it will be looking more like mini camp, which means a lot of passing, which means a lot of opportunities for us to see how these guys are actually performing. So I find that interesting. I like to see the pads, but when we got a quarterback battle on our hands, maybe no pads is a good thing.
I take the other side on this, simply for the reason that you need to establish timing, and timing when there's no contact off the line on these receivers is going to be a world different than when these guys are jammed and having to go over the middle, threatened, et cetera. They're not taking each other's heads off, of course, but the contact makes a difference. And this defense is going to be so far ahead of this offense that the sooner they get on the bike without the training wheels, i.e. the pads are on, they're getting whacked, the better it will be for everyone, and the better appraisal we'll get of whether Cam looks great in shorts and a t-shirt. I mean, are we going to be giving out Jarrett Stidham trophies in the first 4 days? We could be, Phil. We could be.
I mean, imagine if it looks like minicamp though again, and say Mac Jones has 3 good days and Cam Newton has 1 the first 4 days. Like, you know what it's going to be like.
Here comes Stiddy. And here comes Stiddy. All right. Speaking of another ST guy, Stephon Gilmore. And Bill Belichick was asked about him pretty much right out of the chutes during his WebEx conference today. Mike Reese from ESPN knocked out not just a Gilmore question, but he piggybacked it neatly with a N'Keal Harry question. Bill basically pled the fifth. Here he is.
So just a couple topics that we haven't had a chance to talk to you about that came up from the last time we talked in June. I know we had asked you a lot about Stephon Gilmore, and he's since that time has said publicly he wants to be paid what he's worth and hopes something can be worked out with the team. Where does that situation stand, I guess, from the organization's perspective?
Yeah, we're not going to talk publicly about contracts.
And then N'Keal's agent, Bill, had publicly sort of come out and requested a trade. I guess, what is the organization's response to N'Keal's agent's request? And are you on board? Are you okay with him? Is he on board with what's going on here, I guess?
Yeah, not going to talk about contracts and personal situations.
Now, I absolutely wanted to hear him on Harry. I wanted to say, so agent's not happy. How'd that grab you? I mean, just the funniest thing I've ever heard. But with Stephon Gilmore, we haven't had a pod since Stephon did report last week. We were in abeyance. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for having us. I think this thing's heading the right direction. They're talking about common ground 3 weeks ago. He shows up to camp. They're going to figure it out. I'm not saying it's a non-story, but it's not as, you shouldn't have sweaty palms over it.
Well, especially if Gilmore is amenable to just a 1-year pay bump. I mean, the last time we talked about this, Tom, we probably were talking about how realistic it is for him to be expecting an extension and Darius Slay money and $50 million over 3 years and this, that, and the other. And you have long believed that Gilmore would be back and that they would figure it out. I thought he had more leverage than apparently he thinks he has, because he's shown up and he didn't want to pay those fines clearly. And if he's okay with 1 year and just a straight raise, and he's not going to push for that extension, I mean, that's a big win for the
They
Patriots.
got to give him, they just got to give him the bogus Brady extension.
I don't even think they have to do that. What's interesting about the Brady thing, Tom, was I think they had much less in the way of cap space. So they, to make it a little bit easier to spread out, they gave them those dummy years. I think they have enough cap space now. I think,
Well, that's a good point.
where they could just give them the raise and just carry it on the cap this year. Or, I think the best case for the team, the worst case for Gilmore would be that it's incentives, and it's all based in incentives, and it's the 2018 Brady redo or the 2018 Gronk redo.
Which is what he deserves. Look, he had a defensive player of the year season in 2019, but in a pivotal game in week 17 against the Miami Dolphins, he got torched by Ryan Fitzpatrick and Devontae Parker. And then in 2020, he wasn't a very good cornerback relative to his standard of play. He was at times disinterested in tackling and putting himself out there, in my opinion, when I looked at him very closely. And by week 9, he had a torn quad. Here's Devin McCourty, though. And his appraisal as a teammate is different than mine.
Your teammate, Stephon Gilmore, he's kind of expressed publicly that he's not too happy with his contract. What does he mean for this defense? Are you guys kind of hopeful that he can get his situation resolved?
Yeah, I think I said it even during minicamp or whatever time that was when I got asked about it. All that stuff usually gets resolved, and it's whenever a player's contract comes up, it's between kind of the player and the team. So that'll all be figured out. It was good seeing my guy again, and like I've always said, he's one of the best corners in this league. He's been the best guy for the last couple of years. Obviously, defense MVP, and he's really made this defense operate at a different level. When he's out there. So anytime get an opportunity to be out there on the field with him gives us a better chance to win, makes us a better defense. So it's great having him here in the locker room and on this team.
The upshot, though, is, Phil, that if a guy's walking up and saying, I want a $7 million raise, and he didn't play like the player that he had been, do you just cut the check and say, okay, fine? I mean, the Patriots generally don't do that when a guy is playing worse rather than better.
Well, and they set a precedent, right? I mean, when you say that's what he deserves is probably that incentive late in 2018. I mean, if you're the Patriots, you have very strong argument to stand on, which is, listen, Tom won the MVP in 2017, and this is sort of what we did for him.
Right.
So you might have to be okay with this. And I would say even you could kind of split the baby in this way. If you're dead set on doing the incentives, or if you're the Patriots, you could make them relatively easy to reach, right? And they wouldn't count against your cap. You could say, hey, you only played 11 games last year. If you play 12, there's $2 million. You only had 2 picks last year. If you have 3, there's another 2 million. And now all of a sudden you have the base, you have the same salary that you were scheduled to have before we gave you the advance last offseason. And then you get to be a free agent next year and you balled out and you can go make another contract somewhere else. That makes sense to me.
To me too, but I think, the wrangle of it, there's a lot of people say the cap space is there, give it to him. I think that with Kraft having spent $250 million in total contracts in this offseason, plus about 175 in guaranteed money spent, more than he paid for the team, NFL owners lost money last year on their NFL enterprises, as we saw with the Green Bay Packers. I don't know how much the Patriots lost, but if the Packers lost 38, figure the Patriots, put them down for 12. I don't know. Bottom line is, throwing $7 million around is not a habit that the Patriots have been accustomed to over the years. And I don't think that they're about to get accustomed to it right now. So we'll move on from that real quick on N'Keal Harry. No surprise there. Do you think he is going to be traded or released?
If I had to guess, I would say released. I'm just not sure you're going to get anything back for him. Maybe he lights it up in camp, Tom. I mean, best case scenario for both sides, Harry and the Patriots, is that he comes into camp, plays well, especially in the preseason games and in the joint practices, maybe catches somebody's eye, and then he's worth something in a trade, i.e. a day 3 pick somewhere. But I think that's the best you could do.
Does N'Keal Harry play with obvious disinterest? A fire in the belly?
Okay, I would say door number 2, fire in the belly, because if he doesn't do that, he ends up playing poorly, released. And then I guess in theory, it might be okay with him because he can sign wherever he wants. I just don't think the market's going to be all that hot for him. So I would try to ball out if I was N'Keal Harry, and then you get traded somewhere and maybe have an opportunity to play because you just played well this summer. That to me is the best option for him.
All right, let's put a lid on this particular podcast. We're going to hit big camp battlegrounds, and I'm going to defer to Phil, who's done multiple roster projections already. Give me the 4 battleground states on this roster for the final positions. And then I'll tell you the plan for the week, folks. And we're going to let you loose because we're going to be back at you tomorrow. Guarantee.
What's interesting, Thomas, I don't know how many battles there really are. Obviously, quarterback. Okay. That's
okay.
Battleground state number 1. Battleground state number 2 for me is receiver number 2. So Nelson Aguilar should be the first guy based on how much money he's made.
Oh, he's
Then it's probably
WR1.
Jacoby Myers. He's WR1. Then you got, I think, Bourne and Jacoby Myers vying for WR2.
Okay.
I would say corner number 2 without Gilmore. Okay. So maybe it's actually outside corner number 3, but that would be your Jalen Millses, your Miles Bryants, your Joanne Williamses. I think that could end up being an important position. And then I do think, Tom, the 4th battleground state could be inside linebacker. I think Dante Hightower is inside linebacker number 1. I think Kyle Van Noy could be inside linebacker number 2. I don't know.
Where does
who
the
number
Bentley Therese Hall, who I like, he's gone. Therese Hall's going to get
No,
cut.
I don't know. I think those guys are on the bubble. Yeah. I mean,
I
Josh
would keep
Uche,
Therese Hall before Juwan Bentley personally, but that's
okay.
that's-
Well, I
this
think
guy.
there's a good argument there to be made.
But what if you maximize Hightower by getting him off the second level and use him on the edge? Now you have edge guys who are Judon and Hightower, Wise, Winovich, Uche. I mean, they got some guys up front. There
a lot.
are too many good players for the number of positions they have.
Yeah, I think you're talking about backup inside linebackers. I think Hightower at inside is actually how you maximize him because they love to blitz those guys and because he's such a good communicator. They've wanted to play him on the edge before, but then they end up bringing him back to the middle because he's such a good traffic cop. So linebacker will be an interesting one in terms of the depth pieces there. I think kicker, Tom. How about that? I'll throw kicker.
Ooh, I like it. I like it.
Quinn
Kicker's a
Nordin
great spot.
v. Nick Folk. There you go. The reason I say kicker could be a positional battle here is because the Patriots tried to replace Nick Folk last offseason. They drafted Justin Rohrwasser. We remember how that went in the 5th round. Ended up bringing Nick Folk back after they drafted Rohrwasser, released Rohrwasser, and then Nick Folk ends up having a great season, top 5 in the league among guys that have made 20 kicks in terms of his field goal percentage. So good for him, but he's going to be 37 soon. You have this undrafted rookie, Quinn Nordin, who has a monster leg. Matthew Slater today, we just spoke to him, said the guy has a cannon. And so I think they might be willing to work with that ball of clay at the place kicking spot, work with that raw ability and say, we'll take the quote unquote leg speed, the leg power, which is how Cam McCord described it, and maybe go with that over the veteran presence. Like everybody loves Nick Folk, from my understanding, but you might be trying to move on there. So Quinn Nordin is somebody to watch out as a potential usurper to the place kicking spot.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That sums it up. Those are some of the places we're going to be looking at. Finally, give you a quick idea of what Phil and I are going to be providing you with every day, aside from the best coverage in the region of the New England Patriots. Each practice, we'll have an update on the quarterback battle, everything you need to know. One or the other of us will do doing that. We'll get you 10 impressions from the practice. We're going to hit you on the Periscope, okay? We're going to make sure that we give you a quick digital feed of what we saw out of practice. Then, of course, Patriots Talk podcast will be Tuesday and Thursday, emergency pods as well. Next Pats will be continuing to come to you on Wednesdays. We will be on Early Edition. We will be on BST. We will also have Training Camp Central beginning Wednesday and running through the end of the week to bring you up to date on everything that happens down here in Foxborough. Phil, anything else? Did I miss anything?
You nailed it all. I just can't wait to get out to practice and tell the people what's going on.
Same. All right, everyone. For Skull Crusher, for Phil, for me, for all of you. Goodbye.